There we go. Great, Susan.
Hey, fantastic. Thank you, Mary Jean. That's a beautiful introduction, especially the not very painful part. I really appreciate that. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful to have so many people here. Some faces I recognize, a couple of people from afar, from distant places. This is really incredible. And so I thank you for forgoing your time with Jeopardy and Scrabble to be here, or whatever important thing you were going to do to join us for the hour. And I have to thank all the incredible people at Awakening Spirituality. It's just a fantastic team of people to work with. And they've really made this possible and made this invitation possible. So I'm really looking forward to tonight, and I hope you have a good time. We're only together for an hour, and what I'm going to do is walk us through a kind of PowerPoint that's an orientation and really an introduction to this kind of work, and to get you kind of oriented and see if you're interested. And once that's finished, then you can go into breakout groups and take some questions with you, so you have a chance to chat with one another and kind of orient to some of the questions that come up as we're going. And then when we come back, we can have a chat and answer questions and just reflect on things in general. And we're also really just kind of interested to see if there is interest in this kind of work and what that might be going forward. So the tricky part for me tonight is I've been doing this for a long time. It really is a passion of mine. So I've tried to kind of simplify it and make it fun and interesting and compelling. And you'll have to kind of bring my feet back down to the ground if I waft off too far. So because I want this to be meaningful to you. Okay, I know this world, and I know the behind the scenes with this, but I don't know what you know and what you don't, and I want this really to be a meaningful time for you. So your questions and your reflections are going to mean that's what will make the night. Are we set? Okay, I'm going to screen share and see if we can get started. Beautiful. Okay, hope everyone can see that. So this is really the starting point for me. This is what I believe about everyone. And this is the really powerful question behind it. You have a story that's powerful and personal. What would happen if you shared it? That's really the orienting point that we're going to start with. Oh. Let's see. Okay. So the tricky part about spiritual life stories is people often trip over the word spiritual and what we mean by it, or what anybody means by it. So I'm going to offer just a very, very general statement, which is spiritual life stories touch on the spiritual dimension of a person's life, including the kinds of experiences that might be seen as private, odd, or as outside the realm of normal. So one of the questions then is, how do you define spiritual? What is spirituality to you? And whether you're working with yourself, or you're working with a family member, or you're working with other people, it's one of those terms that sometimes people trip over. And I'm just going to give you, blank slate here and say, however you conceive of spirituality and spiritual experience is okay. That's why we're here, to make it okay and to make it a big tent kind of concept. So however you conceive of that is fine. We'll get into some of the tricky part about where does it bump up against definitions of religion or faith. But for the moment, however you think of spiritual, that is part of what is a part of your life story. The interesting thing about these stories is they're often not public, or that we don't share them publicly very well. Certainly in Canadian culture, there are kind of prohibitions around it. It's just not something you trot out in polite company. So we don't really have a kind of ease with talking about these things. And the interesting thing, though, of course, is it's such a powerful part of human experience. It's such a vein in everyone's life. Often those stories or those experiences or kind of cues to those experiences are hiding in plain sight. So you know, I gave a kind of list of here of places where you can often find clues to spiritual experiences or hints of what someone has gone through. And these are really interesting things to think about, especially if you step back and think, wow, what if I wanted to understand, you know, my grandmother and certain kind of attributes or gifts that she seemed to have, and I feel like I've inherited those. These are some of the places you could look to kind of get a big picture of things. Ideally, great place to go, diaries and journals. Why? Because we tell them our deepest thoughts. You know, we know it's a safe place to go and talk about the things that we've experienced. If you have a journal, if you kept a journal, if you haven't kept a journal, now might be a great time to start, because it is a safe place for you to really explore at your own pace and at your own depth and your own language, your own vocabulary for that world and how to bring that to light. Because it's another tricky thing about spirituality is, what language are we using? How can we describe some of these very powerful or ephemeral experiences that people have had? This has been a struggle since the beginning of time. It's why we turn to poetry. It's why we turn to music. It's why we turn to art. Sometimes these things are ineffable and they're hard to describe. And sometimes a diary and a journal is a place where you can kind of work that struggle out. You'll often hear hints of the spiritual dimension in someone's life, especially in a eulogy or in a testimony. Confessions and in tributes. I would say testimonies, in the tradition I grew up in, that's where I learned this language to begin with, was listening to the old people talk and listening to them open up about their lives and extraordinary experiences that they were having, which they would never talk about in the light of day, never talk with strangers about, but they would open up in a particular kind of sacred setting and divulge things that they were going through. And I was one of those nerdy kids who heard that early on, and I was completely hooked. It taught me that the ordinary people that were around me had extraordinary inner lives. It taught me that there was a language for the inner life, that there was a language for something deeper that courses through our human experience than cooking broccoli and haying. I began to understand early on, just by listening, that there was a power and a current that ran through people's lives. And in a sacred space or at a sacred time, people could come together and really explore that. So conventional way, of course, in essays and books, memoirs, autobiographies, biographies. I kind of specialize in working with people who are writing books that are, so memoirs in particular. So a memoir is really not the course of someone's whole life, but it's a theme in their life that they want to explore. And I'm trying to get people to write spiritual memoirs, whether it's a short piece or a long piece, but really to foreground their spiritual life and help other people see that it's normal to talk about this, and it's powerful to talk about this, and it's liberating to talk about this. So that's one place we can go. You'll often find spiritual experience clothed in fiction and in film and in other art forms. Because of course, if you fictionalize it, then that's a safe place to explore really powerful experiences, because no one will necessarily pin it on you as the person behind it. So that's a classic way in our culture that we sort of experiment with the spiritual. And if anybody has even, you know, if you can think of a movie like Sixth Sense, for instance, you know, there are all kinds of things that pop culture expressions of spirituality that everybody feels free to talk about, because it's not necessarily, they're not necessarily owning it, and therefore they don't necessarily feel exposed. And the last one in archival materials. So this is if you were kind of looking at family patterns, which I really, really recommend that you do. Letters, family history, and especially family secrets. Family secrets are the motherlode of stories and clues to a spiritual dimension in an entire family. And I say this because I see this again and again. People come to work with me, and we sit down and we sort of look at how these patterns in their life reflect threads that have run through the generations. And often they're very interesting. They're quaint stories or they're anecdotes. It could be, someone was prohibited from, joining a church. And so she jumped out the window and scuttled down the apple tree and ran off to church in the 1920s. It could be an anecdote like that. Or someone else was, had the vision of a father or an aunt at the foot of the bed. I mean, these things are so common, but they're often not talked about, and especially not explored or really reflected on. And once you start to scratch the surface of the family secrets, you'll find really incredible insights into your own orientation, your family of origin, and farther past. We'll talk some more a bit about that down the road. And so these are just some examples of books that are out there. These are Canadian titles, best-selling Canadian titles, with what I like to call a spiritual bent. So they have something, they have a powerful spiritual undercurrent in the stories, but they're not marketed as spiritual life writing. Okay, that phrasing that we're using tonight, it just isn't common, and publishers generally shy away from it. So they're simply marketed as memoirs. Okay, so this is what I mean about them sort of hiding in plain sight. You kind of have to just start exploring and give yourself permission to kind of go back to your own favorite books or resources, or your favorite people to talk to, and start asking about looking for the spiritual thread, because it may not be packaged in a way that's obvious, but I can promise you it's there. So your story might be just a fragment. It doesn't have to be a book. It can be short. It can be long. It does not matter. What matters is that you take the time to gaze inwards and pay attention to whatever surfaces. All you need is a quiet corner where you can give yourself permission to think, to dream, to feel, and to remember. All you need is the belief that your story is worth telling, even if it's only to yourself. This is one of my favorite quotes about the power of that kind of attentiveness. When we are present, when we bear witness, when we do not divert our gaze, something is revealed, the very marrow of life. We change, a transformation occurs, our consciousness shifts. This is by one of my very favorite authors, Terry Tempest Williams, and I feel like she really encapsulates what happens when we apply that meditative space to reflecting on our own lives and to this hidden current that runs through our lives. And this is a quote I think is beautiful that kind of nudges us into sharing those stories, not just exploring them, but telling them. This is by Linda Hogan, the poet. Telling about our lives is important for those who come after, for those who will see our experience as part of their own historical struggle. So this is encouraging us to kind of take the long view. Insofar as you release your story, you explore it, and you let it move out into the world, you're doing something really important for people who come after you. The historical record as we have it is pretty distorted. It's only limited to certain kinds of voices that have been able to be published or that have gotten the attention. So the whole human record and the incredible diversity of human experience is yet to be acknowledged. It's yet really to be recorded. It's yet really to be understood. And we all have a part to play in that and changing that. As you can tell, I am crazy about life stories. Welcome to the remarkable, if hidden, world of spiritual life story. Let's explore why the stories matter and how you can get started on your own, or how you can help other people tell theirs. And I want to make sure to emphasize that balance. I know that everyone isn't necessarily wanting to tell their own or is comfortable with that, and that's absolutely fine. But you might be exactly the right person who is a catalyst or a listener for someone who is ready and who needs to release theirs. You might simply be that person who's super organized and very kind and very practical and can sit with someone and help them pull their material together and help draw a story out of them. You're doing as important work doing that as you may be working on your own. Or you may not be working with another person. You might just be working with material. You've got, say, an incredible array of material, and you're the person who can pull it together and bring it to the fore. All these strains of work are really critical, and I'm just here to try to empower you to do that and to affirm that, and to say, I think we need to build community around this kind of work so it can go forward in really interesting ways. Oh yeah, and we'll also keep things simple. So because we are in a global pandemic, I just want you to know, even though I have high-flown thoughts, I took all these pictures in my home like the rest of us, because can't go anywhere and do anything. So we're just going to work with what we've got on hand. So this is a picture of my pantry. I don't know what yours looks like, but this is what's in my cupboard, and this is what's on my bookshelf. So, I did not go out and order a bunch of books. We're not tromping around the world to do this. It's just whatever you have on hand is perfectly fine. If it's just beans and tomato paste, and that's all you've got to make your spirit story out of, that's fine for me. Okay, so we can just have fun with it and keep it simple. Even though I use this great expansive global domination language about this, I am just saying, start with what you've got, just work with what you have, and we'll have fun with it. And let's just say something really affirming here. Exploring spirituality, it's a healthy part of a life journey, and giving voice to that journey is equally healthy. Okay, and that's a message that has not really gotten through. Because historically, as I say, only certain voices have been heard. And the time has come to change that. It's really time that we change the conversation around spirituality. And we make room for all kinds of voices. We make room for marginalized voices. We make room for people who didn't feel they had a voice. We make room for voices that we may have tuned out before or made fun of. Everybody's invited to this circle here. Everybody's experiences are absolutely their own to own. And we're not here to judge them. We're just here to create a space where it's okay to explore these things and bring them to the fore. It's partly why I feel this is also really important tool for social justice work, because you're creating a safe, nurturing, empowering space. Okay, so why do I stress the need for change? This is a picture of me holding forth somewhere. Don't worry, you'll see a less romanticized version of me in a moment. But anyway, it's because I've been around the block once or twice. So I've been out doing all these things for the last few decades. And I've learned this from really just working with people, and people coming with these incredible stories and the kind of burden of stories that they want released. So, initially that was working with Holocaust survivors and trying to understand what it took for them to survive the camps. Sometimes it's working with someone who is trying to write a memoir about the loss of their son, like the suicide of one of their sons, and how the family has tried to come to terms with that death, and the question, how is their son on the other side? Right? And so eventually having to get to questions about spirituality, the nature of the universe, the roles that we play. Often it just amazes me the burdens that people are carrying that can be released or shifted once they attend to the story. And this is true about communities in crisis too. I've seen this where entire communities where the stories themselves allow people to just get the feelings out and give it a form. And then they can start to breathe because they can see that emotion. They can see those powerful things that have held hold. They can see it in a form, turn it around and share it with other people and release it. It's an incredible thing to see. So I've just had a very fortunate life that I've been able to do all these strange, peculiar kinds of things. And this is what I've been able to do then in my professional life. But wait, I started out like this. So one of the reasons I believe in this kind of work is because this has worked for me too. So this is a bit of you can't see the hairy legs in this one, it's a shame. It's a great shot from when I was 20, but this is one of those where I myself had to come to terms with my own story, and it took decades for me to do that. So I often describe my history this way, just as a kind of shorthand to give people a little bit of insight into interesting complications in my past. And I say I grew up in a fringe tradition, part of a new religious movement rooted in frontier America. At 18, I eloped to a commune in Appalachia with a boy who'd had a vision that he and I should marry. And so we did. And we lived in an old coach house, waiting on more revelations. By 21, I was on my own. I've been asking questions ever since. Now, turns out most people at 18 don't usually run off to a commune. It was just a great adventure for me at the time. It was the perfect answer to complications at home. And for many decades, I told that story as a kind of parlor story, because it is outrageous. If I unpack it, it's outrageous. And then eventually I tired of the parlor version and I thought, I really need to understand this. I need to understand who was that girl at 18? Who was that boy? Who was that mother? My mother had always played the great villain in the story. She makes a great villain. And what was that all about? And I needed to understand it at a much deeper level and explore those really powerful convergences of what does it mean to give yourself over to someone else's visions? If someone else is having visions and that person is a spiritual authority and you're not claiming your own spiritual authority or you're not listening to your own intuition, what does that mean? What does it mean? What does it mean if you behave in such a way and there are consequences that are heartrending, heartbreaking? Does it mean you've made mistakes? Does it mean that you're a failure? Does it mean that it was all wrong? Does it mean that the sort of religious system behind it was cockamamie? You should not pay attention to it. There were a lot of questions I just really hadn't thought through. I hadn't really explored them. And it was this kind of work and having backed into this kind of work with other people that finally made me realize, I need to do my homework here. I need to understand what this is like from the inside. And the incredible thing was, I've been teaching writing and I've been helping other people do their work. And it wasn't really till I submitted to myself that I understood what it demands of a person, because you really do have to kind of crack open to re-enter your life. Even if you're just writing about a moment in time. I needed to write this coming of age story. I needed to kind of forgive all these characters. I needed to really understand something that I had just lived through and put behind me. And the writing gave me the space to do that. It gave me permission, but it also kind of demanded of me a level of empathy for all the players in my own life and for all the mixed motivations and for all the heartache. I hadn't really even thought I needed to be empathetic. I didn't really even understand how critical that whole quest was. So that's a kind of watershed experience. And I like to share that because it's just a really, really real example. You don't have to write a whole book about it. You can take a single instance in time where there's a whole lot of things are knotted, or where life was really changed after that experience, and revisit it and really give yourself permission to delve into that again. And you'd be amazed at what comes of it. There's some amazing stories on the heels of that, but we'll keep moving. So spiritual life stories really kind of date all the way back to the 4th century. It's an ancient practice. It goes back really to the 4th century and Augustine's Confessions. And the works that we have today cut across all traditions and can teach and challenge people. So what we have out here now is more interesting and more varied, but there's a heritage here. There's a direct history. So the classics, and you get a list of this. Mary Jean will send you the list of all these titles in here. But the real classics in this go back to the 4th century, Augustine of Hippo, Teresa of Avila in the 16th century, Thomas Merton's 7-Story Mountain. Those early classics were rooted in a very specific understanding of the spiritual life. That specifically, it had to do with a person's prayer life and with their relationship to Christian God. These are all, we would call them Catholics, essentially. So that was a very particular understanding of spirituality that has been part of the whole Western Christendom tradition. But contemporary works, as I say, things that you might have on your bookshelf, they crack open into all kinds of human experience, powerful, arresting human experiences, and explore the spiritual dimension of those experiences. And these are just some of the titles that you might be familiar with, or that somebody might pick up and say, wow, oh, Bruce Cockburn, the musician, who knew that his, Rumors of Glory memoir touched on spirituality, but he's a cultural icon, and his whole story is filled with spirituality and music. That has been the powerful driving thing in that person's life. So there are all kinds of, same with Maya Angelou. I know Etta Cageberg sings, she suffered traumatic sexual abuse when she was a child. And the healing from that is incredible. And that is the first of her memoirs, where she explores what that life is like, the life of a child then who undergoes trauma and starts to move towards freedom and liberation. So there are all kinds of things. As I say, go to your bookshelf, start listening, start paying attention, start enjoying what you find. And I would say just challenge yourself. You pick up works that you love, that you feel drawn to, and also find works that really challenge your thinking and that ask you to enter a different kind of experience from what you normally would. Inhabit someone else's world for a time, even if it's just the space of 6 or 7 pages, even if it's just the space of listening to a really incredible story, say on the Moth Radio Hour, for instance. Just put yourself in the hands of someone else's world and see the world through their eyes and see what happens. So delving into spiritual life stories, it is a journey in self-knowledge, but it's something else as well. And this goes back to what I was saying about what I really discovered working with other people and working on my own. When you explore these fully, you are committing to being truthful, radically honest, and authentic. There is no hiding from your own life. There is not. It calls you to be empathetic and non-judgmental towards all the people in a story. And it really pushes you in that direction, trying to understand all the motivations behind what happened, or just accepting what happened and understanding things at a really deep level, a deeper level than maybe we would just in conversing about it. And a belief in the inherent worth of spiritual experiences, however they manifest in a person's life. Your spiritual experience may not be someone else's, or it might not resonate with them at all. Okay, but we've kind of got to make room for that and try out these different languages and try out these different understandings before we really understand this whole field. We need you to tell the story honestly and fully. And I can't emphasize that enough. We need you to tell the story, okay? It's a reciprocal relationship. You're going to learn from telling the story. I'm going to learn from listening to it. And the more real it is, the more authentic it is, the more honest it is, the more power that story has to liberate you, but also me as a listener. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so these are some questions to ask yourself, and we'll go into the breakout groups in a couple of minutes, and you'll have a chance to kick these questions around with other people in the groups. But these are really powerful orienting questions before you go into this kind of work. And everything tonight is introductory, right? It's just kind of setting the stage to see if this is something you'd like to do. So you don't have to produce anything that's the equivalent of not having written since during 3rd grade. These are just, but these kinds of questions really get at the heart of, are you ready and what steps can you take? So motivation, why are you drawn to this work? Believe me, not everybody is. It's a very particular niche. It's pretty rare. You're here tonight. Okay, there's probably a reason for that. And it's probably good to give yourself permission to reflect on that and see where that question takes you. In my experience, people who are drawn to this, they're often carrying something really important, and it might be something they've never shared, or it might be something they've shared that they've been ridiculed for, or they are the keeper of other people's secrets. And if that's the case, there's a really important reason that you're here. Second, context. Kind of what we talked a little bit about before. What's your understanding of spirituality? How does that relate to what you would call faith or religion or practice or tradition? Sometimes all these words are interchangeable and not everybody's comfortable with them being interchangeable. We talk about spiritual but not religious. That's not even really a category that makes sense to some people. Religious people sometimes feel offended. Indigenous practitioners don't even know what the hell we're talking about. We're talking about religion. It doesn't even really make sense to them. So there's a question, if you were to tell your spiritual story, would it be the same as your faith story, if you even have one? It's good to kind of ruminate on these terms and what we mean by them and kind of separate them out. And you don't have to run off and look them up in a dictionary, but just start thinking about how you're using them and what difference does it make. Third one, history. Coming back to the question about family. What does your spiritual family tree look like? Look for patterns and connections across the generations. If you have nothing better to do, you can have a lot of fun with this. Pull out a map of your family tree and start annotating it. For every person on there that you know a story or a rumor or something about that person connected to the spiritual side of things, just start to see what that looks like. Some people can go back hundreds of years, literally, and start to trace sort of connections in their family history. One of them in mine goes back to the 19th century, 1850s, when the census taker was going around farmland and talked to one of my ancestors at the point in time where they're asking about, what religion are you? There was a whole code that the census taker could use to write down, what churches everybody belonged to. And of course, 19th century, there were millions of little breakout groups and little schismatic groups. And whatever my ancestors said at the time was so incomprehensible, the census taker wrote XX, which meant strange references, right? So there we are. So there's our family history, strange references. So I have the authenticity of being fringe people from way back. So you can have fun with this, but you can really sort of start to understand things about tendencies in a family and what things have maybe been kept hidden or covert, or what things are celebrated and where your story fits in relation to that. 4, what's your position in relation to your story? Are you a practitioner of some sort? Are you writing as an insider? Are you someone who's pulled away from certain practices or traditions and you're looking back? Are you simply reporting on something? Are you a mediating kind of person, a bridge person who wants to kind of bring everybody together? Are you an iconoclast, someone who identifies more with sort of the, thinking things through radically and not necessarily falling for the party line? Are you a devotee? Would you call yourself a faithful dissenter? Just give yourself permission to think about your relationship to your own spiritual heritage or to your own spiritual story, because the language you use and your relationship to all of that is going to affect how you tell the story and how your story is heard by other people. And the last one, what supports do you have while you do this work? This is a really critical question. And I would say going forward, these are examples of what support looks like. Do you have a writing practice or a ritual that helps you stay grounded? Do you pay attention to self-care? A lot of things can come up for you when you're working on this kind of material. Do you have trusted companions you can learn from? Are you in conversation with people who understand and appreciate what you're trying to do? And that's where it helps to have a writing partner or a small group, a group of people, trusted people you can really confide in. And if you're working towards a goal of some sort, going public with your story or publishing it or releasing it in some form, are you seeking guidance along the way? And supports is something we can talk about later, but I'll give you some time now to kind of go into the breakout groups, give you a little bit of time to chew over some of these things and kind come up with your own questions and see where you might like to take things. So I'm going to turn this over to Mary and see. It's about 7:39, so how about 10 minutes to chat with one another, and then come on back and we'll see where we can take things from there. Thank you.
I'll just take one moment to make a little adjustment. 10 minutes. And I have posted the questions that Susan posed in the chats. So should be able to see those when you get to breakout rooms. If not, I'll repost them again just in case, because I'm not sure if they actually carry over. And so here we go. There's about anywhere from 3 to 5 different people in the room with you. So we'll give you 10 minutes and then we'll rejoin for any questions and so on afterwards. Okay.